If that hasn't gotten people to wake up yet, what will? Wake up and realize these people don't care about you. The Libertarian Party is the only party that actually cares about your rights to liberty and freedom. What's up, North Carolina, and welcome back to the Liberty Inc. podcast, your source to all things liberty in NC. My name is Mike Ross, and with me today is Chris Mizelle. He is the Libertarian candidate for North Carolina House 38, and I am so excited for this interview, Chris, because you have something pretty unique for libertarians that I really want to talk a lot about, and that is the fact that you are in a two-way race. Apparently, I guess it was the Republicans thought that they didn't even want to compete in this, and just wanted to give it to the Democrats, so I'm excited that the LP is going to step up and not let them run unopposed. So Chris, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Mike. I'm really excited to be on your show, and I appreciate you bringing me on today.
Oh, man, I'm excited. You know, being that this is a podcast primarily for North Carolina libertarians, hopefully, libertarian curious as well, and hopefully some more voters across the state. I really want to talk about, what it means there. The fact that you're in a two-way race. I've been interviewing a lot of Wake candidates, but the fact that it's a two-way race is, you're the first candidate on here. I think we've got one more in Wake that's also kind of running with just one opponent. I'd love to kind of hear, one, about the excitement, and two, kind of what the plans are there, because I think that opens up a whole new level of winnability to the race.
Absolutely. So we're really excited. Like you said, it's a two-way race. There's only one establishment party that I'm contending with. You know, as libertarians, we talk about it. All politics is local, right? Yeah. And so local and state politics matter. And, it's really our time to start winning these elections. And there's no reason why we can't win this race this year. And so I'm really excited about, our platform. I'm excited about the issues we're going to be talking about. I think that we have the best policies, the best answers to questions and problems that people in Wake County and North Carolina are facing. So I'm excited.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, man. The only thing I don't like is that I'm not in Wake County, so I can't come vote for you.
You can move really quick. And,
I mean, I don't know if, maybe, I don't know if my wife is up to it. She's pretty tied to this area. But I think that opens up a big piece, especially when I look at like the broader political landscape, right? We're as libertarians, we're kind of detached from it in a lot of ways that we don't buy into that. But you see how fierce Republicans and Democrats are kind of hating on each other. And I would think, just looking at kind of voter trends, if a Republican steps into the voting booth, doesn't see a Republican but sees a Democrat, I could see, if you're the only candidate, it's almost like, hey, not the Democrat, right? So I guess as long as they show up, hopefully those are kind of almost, in the bag votes. But I love the fact that as libertarians, we have ideas that resonate with people who traditionally consider themselves both Republicans and Democrats. So if you kind of get that default Republican vote, since there is no Republican running, I think the approach there, you pull a little bit of Democrat support, and, here all of a sudden we've finally got some libertarian representation in the North Carolina General Assembly. So I really want to kind of dig into your platform, right? We talked about a couple of things beforehand that just we want to make sure to cover, and one of them is school choice, right? It's a big issue. I know that Governor Cooper even kind of signed a virtue signaling piece of paper for school choice, even though his actions I've seen as a homeschool parent sure don't make me think he's behind school choice. What does school choice mean to you, and how would you present that to Wake County voters on why that's an issue that you're the best choice when it comes to giving the best quality education to their children?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key word is choice, right? We make choices all the time. Where are we going to eat? Where are we going to live? What kind of shoes are we going to wear? We make choices all the time. But why do we not have the same choices when it comes to education, particularly parents, with K through 12 students? And for too long, that choice has not been there when it came to K through 12 schooling. As libertarians, we think that parents should decide. We think that parents should ultimately decide the where and the how, not the government. So my platform is going to be trying to expand as much choice when it comes to kind of that where and how in terms of, their kids' education.
Okay.
Giving them more choices and where to send them, not just the traditional, district public school.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk around kind of different strategies there, right? I've heard of some, some describe it as, dollars following the student as opposed to the school, right? So if you make a decision as a parent to send your kid to the public school in the next little section over, right? Where maybe it's not your assigned one, but that's a better public school and you've got transportation, the dollars follow there. Or maybe you go to, a magnet school or a charter school or a private school, religious school, or even homeschool. What does that really look like, right? Because I know, generally libertarians were against taxation, but the reality is, those tax dollars are being taken and spent on education. What does that tangibly look like for North Carolinians in your vision with school choice?
Yeah, you brought up a lot of good points there. To your point, yeah, we are not in a fully libertarian society. There are taxes, and the state does fund education, and so to the extent that that is the case, we think that money should follow the student as opposed to the system. I think in particular, and there's multiple options when it comes to school choice. There's charter schools, there's private schools, there's homeschools. One of the things that I want to focus on is charter schools in my district.
Okay.
I think they're a really good option. They allow more administrative flexibility. They allow more, academic innovation, and there's different types of schools with different programs. And again, all kids are not the same. They're different. And so there shouldn't be this one size fits all. And I think in my district in particular, charter schools are a great option. So let's talk about charter schools for just a little bit.
Yeah.
I believe it was 96, 97 when they first started in North Carolina, and there was initially, a cap of only 100.
Right.
And within like 4 years, that cap was like bumped up against. They were already hitting that number. And so that tells you, that there was, demand for them. And finally that cap, got extended so that they could start building more. And by 2020, I believe there was like 196, which means they almost doubled.
Wow.
And that was with 48 charter schools closing during that time. So, it's doubled since the cap was removed. And what that tells you is that there's parent demand for it, and that they want options. They want choices besides just the traditional public school in their district. And so a few other statistics around charter schools, they perform better than the traditional public schools. A higher percentage of them receive a grade of A or B. And we actually spend a little bit less money on them per pupil than we do the traditional public schools. And one other thing is they actually receive no funds for capital expenses. And that is, they have to finance their own capital facilities. And so I think there's some things we can do in terms of supporting charter schools. Again, if local, counties and municipalities want to contribute to those capital facilities, we should allow that. And I think that the traditional public schools should be held to the same standard as the charter schools. As I mentioned, 48 of them have been closed since they started. And what if we held public schools to those same standards? Whereas if they're not performing to some expectation, we could close down the traditional public school like we do the charter school.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of choice there too, and the bigger thing, right, is when you think, as libertarians, I think we generally look at government almost in anything it does, and we have different levels of how much of the government we think should be reduced, but we generally all want to reduce it at least some. But one big thing is like just the inefficiency of how they spend dollars, right? Like you said, they spend less dollars per student at a charter school, yet the students get better results, right? The students are getting higher grades, coming out more prepared from what I've seen as well, and charter and private schools, larger scholarships and everything else that's under the sun. And you've got these kind of public schools that are entrenched, and there's no incentive for them to do better, right? Because they're still going to get kind of the largest contribution, right? Even in most of the voucher and programs where they say dollars funding students, the public schools still get the bigger check, right? Like they may get,
absolutely,
and that takes the incentive out, and it almost means that public schools don't have to compete. And as libertarians, I think we all agree, like competition is best for the consumer, right? Whoever is taking advantage of whatever the product or service is, if there's competition, it's going to be better for them. So I love that, man. I'd love to see more charter schools, and more importantly, more competition, right? Any other thoughts on kind of how we ramp that up? You mentioned kind of holding the public schools accountable, right? What does that look like? In your vision.
Once again, 48 charter schools have been closed since 96, 97, and that is due to like poor performance or financial, not being financially sustainable. So again, choice and accountability, I think, is key when it comes to how any market works, how any economy works, and why shouldn't that be the same case for education? So if a public school is consistently underperforming and not meeting the needs of the children, why are we going to, children are our future, right? They're the most important, in our society. We should be training them and raising them to be successful. And if a school is not doing that, right, it should be held accountable.
Okay.
And potentially be shut down if it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems rather than accountability, I look and, not just in North Carolina, but nationwide, it seems to be their solution is just throw more money at it. And sadly, I almost think it doesn't matter how much money you throw at it if you're not addressing the root cause of competition, right? Like if there's nothing that you have to be competing against, the money itself is not going to spur change, right? It's oh great, we got more money to play with.
It's a monopoly.
Yeah, it really is.
And people, from different political persuasions have been against monopolies, right? Yeah. And they want choice. And so that's why that in my campaign, and I know other libertarians, we're talking about that, particularly with education. So yeah. Absolutely.
So on this topic, right? Knowing the uniqueness of your race, right? That you do not have a Republican challenger and just have this one opponent there. I talk about this with a lot of people where libertarian ideas can appeal to people who traditionally consider themselves both Republicans and Democrats. And when I look kind of nationwide, I see some Republicans talking about school choice and better competition, not to the extent that libertarians are, and I see Roy Cooper, in my opinion, virtue signaling with how he's approached it. What's your pitch, right? Because at the end of the day, to win this thing, I think we got to get the Republicans out there to vote, for that. But I think we also have to get the unaffiliated libertarians and really some Democrats, right? What would be the kind of the pitch to the Democrat voter in your district for why you are the better choice, right? I've seen, people are naturally kind of partisan, right? Knowing that we need to pull over some Democrats there to win that. What does that tangibly look like for some Democrat voters? How will that impact their life if you're an advocate in the General Assembly for them fighting for school choice?
Sure. Well, listen, at the end of the day, it shouldn't matter like where you live, where you were born, what neighborhood you live in. Opportunity, right? I think opportunity speaks across the aisle. And to both, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, unaffiliated, Libertarian, the whole American dream, right, is that, we should have the opportunity to, succeed and, get the things in life that we work hard for. But it's really hard to do that if you're robbed from that K through 12 solid education. And so we really want kids to have that foundation regardless of their address and what neighborhood they grew up in. And so that's the way I would approach it is regardless of your background, race, what neighborhood you're from, everyone deserves a shot. And I think choice really will maximize that.
Yeah. And it's really the people who benefit the most too are really, are working class and the poor, right? Mm-hmm. Because the rich people, guess what? They don't really care what district their kid's in. They've got the money to send them to the best private school if that's what they want to do, or if they've got the time to homeschool.
Exactly. And to your point there let me talk about private school for just a minute. I've really emphasized charter schools, but private schools are obviously a great option, and we support that. And the Opportunity Scholarship Program, started in 2014, I believe, and it gives up to $4,200 per year, which is about half of the average private school tuition in North Carolina. And since that started, private school enrollment has been going up again.
Sure.
And so what that tells you is that there's a demand for it and parents want it. And I think we can do a lot. When you look at the funding, going back to how much do we spend on private school choice and how much do we spend on traditional public school education? And it is barely a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
We're talking like 0.5%.
Yep.
If you look at I think the 2018-2019 school year, it was something like 52 million for private school choice versus like 9.4 billion.
Right.
And so it's just, again, and if you look at the per pupil expenditure, there's a gap there too. It's about 8,400 for a average tuition for a private school versus 9,800 that we're spending on public school kids. So again, the numbers support, the data supports our argument. Let's fund students and not failing systems.
Yeah, I mean, so let's kind of, if you don't mind, and I don't want to put you on record on a position, but I'm kind of thinking through this, then those numbers you threw out there, right, where it looks like we're spending twice as much, right? If you twice as much on public school versus private school, right? And that can be a great help to someone who, couldn't afford private school at all, right? And if you get them part of the way there, and the private school may offer, a low income scholarship or something there to kind of get them the rest of the way. I look at that and I still don't see that as fair competition, right? Fair competition would be, hey, if you're going to give $9,800 per student to the private school or to the public school, and that student decides to go to a charter school or a private school or anywhere else, have that entire amount of money follow them. And I feel like that's real competition. You've got parity between what a student's worth. And now the schools are all going to compete, right? For those same dollars.
Because what would happen? What would happen if we did that?
Well,
people would leave the traditional public schools.
Sure.
They would go to these other options. And so to your point, what I'm saying is let's increase this funding for the students themselves and let the parents decide where they're going to send them. Again, and then if you look at the whole bucket, right, it's barely a drop when it comes to what we're funding for these school choices versus the kids being trapped in these failing school systems.
Yeah. Well, let me hit on one other one, because we now covered charter schools, charter schools, private schools, public schools. I want to hit on homeschool, and this is just me. Sometimes this is just us having a conversation, right, Chris? So I'm a homeschool teacher, right? I run a business, so I said I'm going to carve off a few hours a day, homeschool my son, and I look at what's going on in North Carolina. Specifically, Cooper talking about increased school choice, and I look at it as now going in, in my second year of homeschooling. And I see that they're trying to make my life more difficult as a homeschool parent. Like right now, it's pretty straightforward. I've kind of got the core subjects I have to teach, have to do one standardized test, but they're wanting to put more restrictions and make that a bigger burden on me. I can tell you as an engaged parent, the state of North Carolina and the federal government care far less about my son's education than I do. And I comply with these regulations because it's what the government makes me do. And I don't want, them to knock down my door and throw me in a cage or take my kid away from me, right? But I can tell you, like, all of the things that they're looking at doing are not going to improve my son's education. They're not going to improve that experience. It's just going to make my life harder. What are your thoughts on kind of the involvement of where does homeschooling fit into this? How much would you like to see, them dictating what parents like I have to do?
So I think homeschooling is a great option. I think, it takes a lot to do it. And for those who can and want to do it, I fully support it and encourage it. I also understand that not everybody can.
Yeah.
I think that Wake County, though, has like the highest homeschooling population in the state. And so I'm a big fan of it. I think that people who can and want to, they should. And, the government needs to get out of the way,
right?
And let parents be parents. They're the ones, like you said, you have your child's more than anybody else, even if you send them to a private school or charter school or whatever. Like
I pulled my kid from private school to do it, so just to put that in perspective. So yeah,
right. And so, to the extent that parents can and want to do that, I fully support it, and I think I'm a big fan of it. Yeah. and I support the least amount of restrictions coming from the government in terms of homeschool.
Any thoughts, and this might be a wish too far, any thoughts on like funding when it comes into homeschooling, because I look at it here, I'm like, all right, I'm paying for public school, even though I'm not using that service and have a school age child. Any thoughts on that impact?
Yeah, that's a great point. I would be in favor of, just like we have the opportunity scholarship for, private schools, why can't we, expand that funding to include homeschooling and give that option?
Man, I'll tell you what, I almost might move to Wake for that one because, getting some of my tax dollars that I'm spending back on service that I'm not using
Well,
does sound
what
pretty good.
about the education savings account? Having something like that, because that is something that we have for those private schools for kids with, I think, IEPs or
Yeah.
certain disabilities. And could we expand an education savings plan or something to include uh, homeschooling as well as private school? So
Man,
to your point, yeah, there's definitely increase. We could definitely improve that.
I like it, man. I like it. Any kind of final thoughts on school choice that you want to cover?
No, I think we hit it. Just again, how I'm a former school teacher,
Okay.
so and I am a product by and large of public K through 12 education. I taught in the public schools. I get it. I understand the system. I understand how important education is for our kids, but I also understand that a one size fits all policy does not work. It doesn't work for anything,
Yeah.
much less education. And so again, I think school choice fosters parent involvement. I think it fosters accountability and competition, and that's what we need.
Man, and I know we were thinking of moving on for school, but knowing that that you used to be a teacher,
We can talk about school choice all day, man.
dude, man, no, I think about this, right? Because when I think of, again, government wasteful spending, right? When I think of the role of educating a child, right? You have this little human being that's a sponge for knowledge that wants to learn all of these things. The teacher is, in my opinion, the biggest function of that equation, right? Like they're the ones doing most of the work. Yeah, there's a principal and an assistant principal and all of
Oh
those
yeah,
things, but I see the system so filled with bloat with like, county and district level administrators making six-figure salaries who are not doing any of the real work of educating the minds of children. And I just think, as you think through this system, right, where you said, charter schools and private schools who are getting like, roughly half the funding of a public school, which I think of kind of the bigger picture. I'm a financial planner by trade. So like
right.
economics of things is like a big thing that goes on in my brain. And I'm sitting here thinking, what would happen if the private schools or the charter schools got that same amount that the public school did? I feel like, well, teacher salaries would rise very rapidly. And then similarly, if you had all of that bloat pulled out of the public school system, teacher salaries could rise too. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of people like don't realize is if you get all of this kind of together and look at the big picture of it, that's something that I think is important, right? Teachers are doing most of the work. Why are they not the highest paid people in the system,
Doesn't
right?
make
Why
any
is
sense.
it,
It doesn't make any sense.
it does, and I think that's if we can get government out of the way and kind of put that back on schools and make them compete, it gives teachers the opportunity to kind of rise and kind of fill that. Where I think, and I'm not going to put anybody on the spot. I'm far more anarchist than most people, right? I'm personally okay with the full abolishing of the public school system. I don't
Right.
think everybody's there, right? But I think of it, it's like if you kind of had that system where the dollars follow the student. And I think there's like a teacher in my neighborhood, and we're
Yeah,
170 units, right?
like a micro school kind of
Yeah, a
thing.
micro school. Like all of these free market solutions could pop up, and those teachers would make so much more money, have a better quality of life. And
Because it would just be about like the student and the
yeah,
teacher, right? There wouldn't be all these government bureaucracies and somebody in some central office getting paid
yeah,
hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it would just be okay. This teacher is, in this neighborhood, and there's this many kids, and their parents pay the teacher, and like that's what it would be.
or even in the interim, like while the government's still funding it, right? You pull your child out of public school and you give it to this micro school, and now this student,
Hmm.
at what when you said the number was like 9,800 that goes to a
For,
public
for a traditional public
for a
school, yeah.
traditional public school per student. Think about that. If a teacher had 10 students in a micro school, right, just serving their neighborhood, right, and they come up with a full curriculum to deal with different ages, you now have $98,000 gross for that teacher. which
Right.
they run it out of if they run it out of their house or whatever it is, you know, at that rate, maybe they even go lease a building, right? Like, or something like that,
Right.
and have that. That
With
becomes
10
an
students.
option, right? With 10
Yeah.
students, imagine if they had 15 or even 20, whatever they're capable of. And I just see that end result, you know, because as a homeschool parent, like, I only have one student. When he has questions, he comes to me and answers it. So we get done with our day so much faster than a traditional school, because you're not waiting on other kids to have their questions answered and everything else. Sorry to go off on that tangent, man, but it popped into my head. And
No, man, free market solutions are always superior to government.
Well, I would, you know, I truly hope that you can get elected and move the needle on that, because I think that, you know, whatever state does it first is really going to be an innovator in the country. And I think that it'll spread like wildfire once these free market solutions come to fruition and we see the long-term results. But I don't want to just talk only about school choice, because there's a ton of issues. And I know another big one that was kind of on your list and in your platform is criminal justice reform. Kind of near and dear to my heart for anybody who's kind of been following, you know, my activism. And I see so many problems with the criminal justice system as it is. But let me hand it over to you. How do we fix this criminal justice problem that we have in North Carolina and the United States?
Yeah, I think you and I were actually having a conversation at the state convention about low-hanging fruit.
Yeah,
and I think there's a lot of things we could do, right? But I think there's some low-hanging fruit there that we can have some wins, right? And so, particularly around criminal justice reform, I think one of the main issues is decriminalizing marijuana.
Yeah,
you know, and here's a crazy thing, Mike. At bare minimum, how is it that in North Carolina we haven't legalized medical marijuana? You know,
yeah,
at bare minimum. And obviously we want to go further than that, but you know, it's crazy to think that. But in my platform, you know, I'd like to see a decriminalization, both, you know, medical, recreational. You know, as libertarians, we believe that you own yourself.
Sure.
And it's not the state's job to tell you what you can or cannot put into your body or what you have to put into your body, right? We believe those things. And so if there is no victim, there is no crime. And so, you know, I think that adults should be free to grow, sell, and consume marijuana, you know, as they see fit, as long as they aren't hurting people.
Sure.
So yeah, that's pretty, you know, basic for us as libertarians. But I do think that the public opinion on that is moving in our favor. And I think that as North Carolinians, we're getting closer and closer to being ready to do that. And so I would push for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so many, and I see it even recently, where you see, like, you know, local police departments in North Carolina posting their photos where they like, oh, hey, we stopped this car and we found, you know, 3 ounces of marijuana and, you know, some cash and a gun. We've taken it off the street. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, so you stole somebody's property and their plant, and they didn't really do anything other than have property and plants.
Right.
And you're bragging about it, right? And I look at that and I say, well, that's criminal, right? Like, you're stealing from somebody. What you're doing is criminal. What the person did, you know, that's kind of one piece, and I'd love to see that. Would you say, you know, take that to the point where, you know, legalize that, and then, you know, the challenge there, would you like immediately call for, you know, expunging the records, release everybody who's in, you know?
That's a good point that I wanted to follow up on is moving forward, it should be decriminalized, but also retrospectively, anybody who has that, you know, on their record, we'd like to see that cleansed as well. So, you know, so that when they're going to interview for a job, you know, they don't have that on their record. When they're going to buy a gun, they don't have that on their record.
Sure.
You know, why are we penalizing them for a victimless crime?
Yeah, no, that's a big one too, where, you know, I've seen it in other states that, I was just in Florida, where my best friend was, and they have medical marijuana down there, and his wife, my best friend's wife, is dealing with chronic pain and was going to get the medical card, but she can't get a concealed carry permit. How crazy is that, right? That you go to a doctor prescribes you medication, and you're losing your right to defend yourself. How is that justice?
It's not.
And that's something that, you know, I see that in even the places that have legalized it, because, you know, you go to buy a gun, that asks you that right there on the application is, you know, do you use marijuana? Doesn't ask about anything else. It doesn't ask if you're an alcoholic. It doesn't ask if you smoke crack, right? None of that. Do you use marijuana? And if so, you can't buy a gun. That's kind of a travesty, and I'd say that that's something that I'd like to see fixed as well. Right up there with criminal justice reform on decriminalizing, right? So let's kind of draw a line there. Decriminalizing versus legalizing. Where do you kind of stand there? Because some say, hey, decriminalize it, but we don't want it. We don't want to encourage or put it out there. And again, I don't know if I'd ever really encourage anyone to do anything like that. But where do you stand? Like, do we just want to decriminalize it and kind of lessen the enforcement, or would you go all out and say, hey, let's completely legalize it and create tax-paying businesses?
So yeah, that's a good point. Where I'm at is I would like to see, again, I think that adults should be free to, as long as they're not hurting anybody, they should be free to grow it in their backyard. They should be free to sell it to any consenting adult. They should be able to start a business, selling it if they so choose. So I am for legalizing it, not just sort of decriminalizing, but the full legalization of it. Again, if private companies want to say you can't do it here, I totally understand that, right? Yeah. But for somebody in their personal property in their home, they should be able to, again, grow it, consume it, exchange it if they so choose. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, no, I like that. What about on some of the other ones, right? Marijuana, I think is definitely, as we were kind of chatting at convention, kind of low hanging fruit. And I think I really think at this point, the vast majority of Americans are on that level, especially for medical marijuana at this point, right? Recreational is not quite there, but the data is pretty overwhelming. What about some of the other ones? I'm an anarchist. I'm not shy about that. I'm for, some people would say, the crazy idea of legalizing heroin and crack and all of these things. Not because I think anybody should do heroin or crack. Don't do those things. They're bad for you, but you're an adult, do what you want. Where do you fall on that as far as how that would look?
So me personally, where I fall on that is, again, if there is no victim, there is no crime. You should be free to put in your body what you choose, or don't put in your body what you choose. There should be no force or coercion either way.
Okay.
Again, as long as you're not hurting somebody. So when it comes to those other drugs, I'm not sure if the majority of North Carolinians are there yet.
Yeah.
I am. But again, like you said, low hanging fruit. How do we get some wins and head in, the right direction? And then we'll go kind of one step at a time.
Right.
But for me personally, no, I think that the government has no business telling you what you can and can't grow in your backyard or put into your body.
Right. No, I like that. I respect that too. You can have it personally, right? But you're representing.
I might not run on that. I might not run on that, in this campaign, but in terms of what I personally believe,
yeah. And at the end of the day, you're representing North Carolinians, right? So if, to some extent, if the vast majority of North Carolinians are against that, right, then you kind of have that mandate of, it's not going to be a central push of the campaign, right? Other things on criminal justice reform, because this is one that I see a lot of problems with, not just on the drug war, although I think the drug war would be ending the drug war would be a big fix. What are some other kind of key pieces in the criminal justice reform that you'd like to see changed?
Yep. Another low-hanging fruit that I see is civil asset forfeiture. And so for those who don't know exactly what that is, you may have heard of it. It's basically when law enforcement can seize property that they suspect of being a crime, regardless of if you're charged or found guilty, right? If they suspect that it is linked to a crime, they can seize it. So obviously that violates personal property rights, that violates due process. That whole idea of like innocent until proven guilty is kind of thrown out the window. Let me say a few things about North Carolina, though. Yeah. Technically, according to our state, our NC statutes, we don't have civil asset forfeiture. Okay. But it's circumvented through something called equitable sharing, which is basically where state law enforcement can cooperate with the feds. So in one case, it's just kind of like a joint investigation. And if they work with the feds in a joint investigation, they can be a part of that civil asset forfeiture and get part of those, proceeds. The worst form, though, is what's called adoption. And that's basically just where state law enforcement, without any kind of joint investigation, can seize the property and then just go to the feds and hand it to them for quote unquote adoption.
Yeah.
And then it's, put under federal civil asset forfeiture and processed that way. And the bulk of the proceeds go back to the state agency that seized the property. And North Carolina is one of the worst states when it comes to this. I think the Institute for Justice ranked us as one of the 10 worst states when it comes to using equitable sharing to circumvent state law. So I think, when we're talking about policy, that's a sort of low-hanging fruit, right? Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of any kind of equitable sharing where you're working with the feds, you're handing it over for adoption. At the end of the day, we need to end civil asset forfeiture, right?
Yeah,
no loopholes.
It's a fancy way to say stealing. I mean, I remember teaching my son when he was like 4, hey, stealing's wrong, don't do this. And
yeah, there was that whole thing about stealing being bad.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I don't know where politicians seem to have forgotten that, but I mean, the fact that, the analogy that I joke with that one where, yeah, we don't have civil asset forfeiture in North Carolina, but if you're a North Carolina cop and I'm a DEA agent and you say, hey, I just got this guy with $100,000 in cash. Hey, Mike, come get this money. I mean, that's basically what it is, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to steal the money, but you call me, I come steal the money and I throw you a big kickback for taking it. And, that's what when I see people say, hey, North Carolina doesn't have civil asset forfeiture. I love that you hit on that because, yeah, we don't, but we do.
But we do.
Yeah, we don't,
and in fact, let me throw some numbers at you. So between 2000 and 2019, state agencies in North Carolina collected almost $300 million through equitable sharing. So that's $300 million in addition to all the other ways the government steals from us, right? Where this is just literally them coming
just
and
direct
taking
stealing.
property.
Yeah, direct
stealing. like you said earlier, the guy, he had a plant, he had some money, and he had a gun. Okay. And they're just really good at taking things from us, again, directly, indirectly, but
well, I think back to the founding of this country, right? George Washington. If you would have stopped him, you could have found him with hemp, money, and a gun.
Yeah.
Right? Did anybody stop George Washington and steal his plants, money, and
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I don't think that was happening then. But fast forward now, and that happens, almost every day in our country, across the country.
And again, let's talk about where you live, right, and your background and what neighborhood you're born in. This doesn't happen to the wealthy and the connected. It happens to people who have, that aren't super rich and wealthy, right? And so again, we're talking about equal opportunity, right, for everyone.
Yeah.
And so the government kind of picks and chooses how they enforce things, and obviously in something like civil asset forfeiture, it's often the people that are the most vulnerable to that kind of thing. It's not the wealthy and the super politically connected that are getting their stuff stolen from them. Yeah,
well, I mean that hits on another criminal justice issue. Is the whole system is designed, like I've got an issue that I've been kind of working on with activism about cops who beat up a homeless guy locally, right? And I look at that and I say, if he was rich, it would be no problem. He'd have a great lawyer. All of this would be handled, and he has an opportunity to fight back. But specifically, like lower income people, regardless of any other characteristics associated with them, just looking at the income level, like they're the most victimized by the criminal justice system, right? Like you not only get stopped for this small victimless crime, right? But now you go through this expensive process of court fees, of all of this other stuff, and you're basically pushing down on the people who can afford it least, right? If I'm a millionaire and I have to spend a few $1,000s to get out of doing something, it's basically just a tax. It's not really a crime, right? It's just a tax. But
it's like NBA players getting fined, like $10,000.
Yeah, oh yeah, hey, I punched. This guy said something about my mom. I punched him, right? Like in the NBA. Yeah. Oh, I got a fine, but to them it may be worth it. But to someone who's poor, like they get popped with something there, and now they're having to plead guilty instead of fighting it. Like there's so many things that come out of it that I think we need to really do something about. So I like that that you're putting it front and center, right? So I always joke with people, because I'm pretty rabidly anti-Republican and anti-Democrat, right? Which some people, I'm not running for office, so I can be a little bit more rabid than someone who's relying on that. But I tell people sometimes, like, oh, you're a Republican, oh, you're a Democrat. Well, if you just vote Libertarian, you'd get more of the stuff that your party promises you and doesn't deliver, right? Like, I think Democrats have been harping on criminal justice reform for so long. They have the government right now. Where is criminal justice reform at the federal level? So I would just say, if there's any Democrats listening, if you care about criminal justice reform, please vote for Chris Mizelle. I promise he will be a better advocate than the Democrat, and I don't even know who the Democrat is. I'm just going based on what I see Democrats doing across the country, where they talk about it, have the power to fix it, and repeatedly do nothing. And I'm looking at the time here, man, and I want to stick to your time. I know we got a couple of no-knock raids, qualified immunity. Can we say end both of them? Is that a good summary of your position on?
I would say end both of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I might kind of start with the low-hanging fruit. I think the marijuana and the civil asset forfeiture are kind of things that I would emphasize the most, but definitely no-knock raids. I mean, again, why are we doing that? Qualified immunity. Why does a government official, why does a law enforcement officer, why are they held to different standards than the rest of us?
Sure.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Again, to me, like what you said earlier, that sounds like a crime. Why is it that they're held to a different moral compass than we are as citizens? And you think back to, George Washington, you were saying earlier, can you imagine what he would say if, you were telling him that, like law enforcement can come into your house in the middle of the night and break down the door and, raid your home and shoot you.
Right.
What would he say about that? And again, I think that if we talk about these issues and explain them, I think that the public opinion will be there on our side.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for some of them, like the public opinion probably already is on our side. Yeah. I just feel like, special interests and things like that kind of pressuring politicians is the reason that they don't get it done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And to your point, again, Democrats have been just as bad, if not worse, than the Republicans have on this issue. Republicans really haven't done anything either. So, again, we have an opportunity here in Wake County to actually, elect a Libertarian. Like, let's bring that real change that you're talking about. I'm not bought and paid for by anybody. I'm not going to be beholden to any special interest or corporations or anything like that. If you elect me, I promise to do these things that we're talking about and actually get real change.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, I want to touch on kind of one last topic that was here before I kind of get into what I think is important with all the plugs that we'll wrap up on. But housing affordability, that's an issue that you said is a big piece of your campaign that you're highlighting. I think almost wherever you are in the country right now, you're seeing this as a problem. Talk to me about it, right? Because a lot of times people are like, well, house prices are just what they are. And a lot of times people can't connect the dots of how government involvement has a role here. How would electing Chris Mizelle help with the problem of housing affordability that we're seeing across North Carolina?
Sure. To your point, it's a problem. Housing prices, we're going up. The demand is there, but it's really, really hard in terms of being, affordable for people to actually buy or rent. In my district in Raleigh, housing prices have gone up 32% in the last year. I think rent is up about 20% in the last 4 years. So it's not very affordable, right? And so that's the problem. So to your point, there's a myriad of reasons why things get more expensive. But we can look at the state and local level in terms of zoning restrictions that are onerous, that are burdensome for home builders. And so basically what's going on is through regulations at the state and local level, they're artificially lowering the housing supply, even though the demand is there. And so what that does is it makes the prices go up.
Sure.
You have to, meet all of these regulations, and it just makes it more expensive than if we actually had a free market and supply and demand, dictated the market. It would be much more affordable and prices would go down.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point, right? Where you think of how, especially in new construction, right? Where you want to have zoning things where, maybe you build more duplexes, right? Well, if the government won't let you build duplexes, now you need, more property. But even
family homes and all
yeah,
that,
it's all single family homes, and there's definitely, I think we see that in a lot of places with NIMBYism and all of that. But the other thing is just within the cost of construction, right? And the cost of all of these things, I don't think people realize how much is spent towards regulation compliance in the construction of a new home. Like it's
Absolutely.
thousands and thousands. In some cases, depending, I wouldn't be surprised if it's tens of thousands of dollars in added cost just to construct it, just to comply with all of these regulations and having inspections and all of these things that, I can tell you, like, builders, they want to build a quality home, right? Their reputation is there. They're not, I just see it as if the regulation wasn't there, they still want to be able to say, hey, we build a safe home. We build these things higher than standards, because that's good marketing and good business. Right. So you'd want to just pull try and get the government kind of out of that and at least let market forces be really the big players. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So again, less restrictions, less government red tape. Because again, to your point, in order to build it, all the hoops that they have to jump through, and it ends up costing them more money, which then gets passed on to the person who's actually trying to buy or rent the property. I will say this: I know we have just a few minutes left, but I do think that the needle is kind of moving in North Carolina. Last year, the state legislature tried to pass the act to increase housing opportunities. It actually passed both houses, but it did not actually become law. But what that tells you is that, we're moving in that direction. Right. And there was a lot of good stuff in that bill, such as, I think you had mentioned, duplexes and triplexes, making it so that, there weren't those restrictions just to build single family homes. Yeah. It would have done things like permitted homeowners to rent out part of their home as an ADU. So ADUs are a very kind of innovative market solution. They're accessory dwelling units, but it's basically where, like, if you have a property, there can be either attached or detached from that somebody who comes and lives, whether it's like an in-law suite, an attic or a basement apartment, or an actual detached home on the same lot. These are restrictions that get in the way from, again, affordable housing. Right. It would have done other things too, such as like just reducing other restrictions like use of land that didn't actually pose an actual threat, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of, I think, again, momentum heading in that direction, and I think we need to continue to push for that. Again, as much as we can, less government restrictions and more market solutions.
No, I like it. I like it. Imagine that, being able to do what you want with property that you own. So Chris, right. as we wrap up here, we have a two-way race, Libertarians. Chris needs your support. Definitely, if you're in Wake in his district, vote. But Chris, where can people go to donate to your campaign? Where can they go to volunteer, to phone bank? How can we as North Carolina Libertarians best help you? Where do we need to go? Where do we need to follow? All the plug of everything that you want to do. Now's the time, man. Let me give you 5 minutes to kind of close with as much as we can to how we can help you.
Sure. So the first thing, to answer your question, electmizelle.com is going to be the webpage. And so that's going to have, a link to PayPal if you want to donate. It's going to have a link to my Facebook page, issues, and all of that information, volunteer signups. So electmizelle.com. And then, again, I just want to thank you for just allowing the time for me to come on your show today. I'm really excited about this. As a former history teacher, I'm excited about making history as the first elected Libertarian in North Carolina, right? We have a chance to actually make history and be a part of, to your point, real change. The Republicans and the Democrats, they talk about it, but they end up doing the same thing over and over again because they're bought and paid for, they have their special interests, their cronies. I'm a real guy. I'm a real person, right? Yeah. Down to earth. I'm a former school teacher. I'm a data analyst now. I am going to go in there and actually fight for the people and not for these special interests. So I appreciate the time. And I'm really just looking forward to us actually winning this race.
Yeah. And is there anywhere they can follow you on social media, any of that anything that you put? So Elect Mizelle, I'm going to have it in the description down below of this YouTube video. Anywhere else that they can get you with follows or anything else that we want to put there in the description for viewers?
So electmizelle.com, that'll have a link to my Twitter,
okay.
Facebook, and all of that. So they'll be in the webpage.
Awesome.
So that's probably the best, just kind of one-stop shop,
I like it
to get everything. But really would, again, appreciate any and all support in whatever way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. Well, you heard it, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Wish you the best of luck once that site is up. Again, I will have it in the description down here. North Carolina Libertarians, I hope you can go over to electmizelle.com, look through there, donate, see how you can help, and get excited because it's a pretty rare opportunity to only have one opponent as a third party candidate. So let's go make history and elect Mizelle. North Carolina, I'll see you next week. Thank you so much, and keep fighting for liberty.